Well, good morning, everyone. Today we're joined by Dr. Nuku Ofori, Assistant Teaching Professor at our McCourt School of Public Policy, Associate Faculty Director of our Master of Policy Management program, and the National Urban Fellows program. So Dr. Ofori, it's a pleasure to welcome you to our conversation series. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Let's get started. Now, you're an expert in public policy with a background in a range of issues from foreign affairs to international security. Can you share a bit more about your current areas of focus and the public policy questions you're most interested in?
Certainly. And I'd like to start off by again thanking you, for giving me the opportunity to talk with you today. My background, is a lot of my professional background is from Capitol Hill. From Capitol Hill going to, the Obama administration. And on Capitol Hill, we always had a saying that, you never outshine your boss. And sometimes it is hard to get out of that mindset, and always let your work speak for yourself. So I do appreciate now the opportunity of actually speaking with my work. So with that said, I do find a benefit of working on the Hill and actually having my professional experience combined with my, academic interests, is that, there is a unique intersection of, what my area of expertise and interest is and, and how I hope to apply that. And so what I'm focusing on right now, as you mentioned, lots of things, what I'm focused on right now is military engagement, and how militaries engage, why they engage, what factors, are determined, or what factors appear rather, for militaries to engage in conflict and in war. So it's not just the US military, but militaries around the world. And one of the things that are interesting is, why is this an interest and what applicability does that have? In our whole public policy sphere, we want predictability, right? So we want to be able to understand, when things occur, given a set of circumstances. For example, if, with the NATO alliance, an attack on one is an attack on all when Article 5 is, called up, or executed, but are there instances in which the U.S. military might engage, to where, it may be not, obvious, or it may, seem to be not called for readily that the U.S. military might be engaged? Are there other militaries that are engaged, in asymmetric warfare or other types of warfare that's not traditional? So that's the type of work that I'm looking in. And I hope to actually, enlighten, our lawmakers, our policymakers, and our decision makers, of, perhaps there are some new indicators that we need to see or need to be aware of, in where there are conflicts that we're not really considering, at the moment.
Sure. Now, you served as a senior advisor to the Obama administration to both Secretary Hillary Clinton and Secretary John Kerry. Can you tell us a little bit about the experience?
Yeah, thank you. It was a formative experience, in both places. And there are two things that really stand out, and it's emphasized, in the classes that I teach now in public policy. And it really is the perspective of the stakeholders, and the goals and the outcomes, even if the goals and the outcomes, are commonly shared. The perspective of the stakeholders actually shift, what is acceptable, what outcomes are acceptable, and it was not something that I really appreciated when I was on Capitol Hill. Obviously, if we, have common goals, and we can agree on what might be acceptable outcomes, that should be seemingly a logically a pretty area, a easy area of agreement, but what I found, working, under Secretary Clinton, with the Benghazi scandal, right? And I say scandal, it was, very quickly, that was the attack on the American consulate, there were a number of leadership failures, which the State Department had recognized. There was a number of leadership failures that the Congress had, investigated and recognized, yet there was an assumption of risk, with diplomacy that happens, that was not shared. right? It was something that, there was a certain amount of risk. And I was talking about our military. When the military engages, unfortunately, there is assumed risk that lives would be lost. There isn't the same assumed risk, in diplomacy that lives could be lost, right? And, with Benghazi and having that American consulate open, there, was an opportunity to establish democracy where there was none, right? And Congress did not agree. Congress did not agree that this was an acceptable risk, even though we had common goals, and so this is something that I teach my students, and something that, I actually emphasize this paradox to lawmakers, that there are common goals, we may share the desired outcomes, but because of their personal stake, the institutional stake, they actually have different interests in what the outcome should be. And I'll say quickly with, I beg your pardon, Secretary Kerry, one thing that was really formative was the Iran deal, the Iran nuclear deal, or the JCPOA. And the deal actually had started, or the negotiations rather, had started during the Bush administration, right? And it had started during the Bush administration and it went through the Obama administration. There was an institutional interest to have this deal go forward, yet with Congress, because of their own institutional perspective, they completely disagreed with it. They didn't accept that it was an acceptable risk to take. So again, where you have institutions actually have a different perspective, than perhaps, is, what would be, logical, right?
Sure,
Mhm.
sure, sure. So tell us, with your experience and expertise, what was at the forefront of your mind as the events unfolded at the Capitol on January 6th?
Right.
And
So it was, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you.
well, no, tell us what you were thinking about, and then we can talk a little bit about the new administration.
Yeah, so it was a very surreal experience, having worked there for so long and seeing, the, the chaos that unfolded. It was disheartening, but really, I did get a chance to, even when it was unfolding, take a more sober and a more macro view, of what was occurring. Um, and what really came to my mind, the forefront of my mind, was, contrasts and commonalities. And for many of the Trump supporters, and even for the supporters that turned into the rioters, right? When you hear them, and what their grievances are, that they are insecure, they suffer from food insecurity, like, many Americans. They suffer from job insecurity, like many Americans. They suffer from financial insecurity, like many Americans. And they feel like their government is not working for them. And what was so fascinating, when I now come to commonalities with the Black Lives Matter movement and why it resonated so much, was that people can finally see and understand, what Black people have gone through, yet have not really been able to communicate. And there was mass empathy, understanding, what the other side was like, right? And so, I think President Biden's message of unity really now resonates, that people, even for people that, are on a perspective, or, a political spectrum that's, far, in an extreme from one end to the other, there are still some commonalities that really bind all of us, right? And there are still common policy goals that we can achieve that will satisfy all of us, even if, President Trump and his supporters, are very different, from President Biden and his supporters.
Sure, sure. Now, as you experience the new administration entering the White House, are there policy priorities or challenges that you're watching closely?
Oh, very much so. No, so one is actually, what we were talking about from the outset, right? The U.S. engagement in the rest of the world, or re-engagement,
Mhm.
right? And really, and this other dynamic, this micro macro dynamic, the things that are happening here domestically are also happening abroad, right? And so instead of us turning inward, and being insular, we are trying to re-engage, globally, as a global partner, not just, as the global prima donna, and so now how will we engage and who will we engage with? So it is not just engaging with China or seeing what happens with China, but looking at the goals that, prior administrations have, for example, really engaging with the African continent, for example, and not just from a security deficit standpoint, but really as a global partner, and knowing that there is so much potential, so much untapped potential that's there. How will we engage? And I think President Obama and his administration really started in that direction. And I do hope that President Biden and his administration continues in that direction. And again, this is something that, we have done in successive administrations from, Republican to Democrat, yet, we seem to be stuck in a very narrow, myopic lens, and hopefully we can move forward to a broader lens where we're more engaged as in the global community.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, in addition to your scholarship and teaching, you also serve as Associate Faculty Director of the McCourt's Master of Policy Management and an important program housed at the McCourt School, the National Urban Fellows Program.
Yeah.
Can you share with us a little bit about the National Urban Fellows and what it's been like establishing an academic home for this program at the McCourt School?
Oh, most certainly. Be my pleasure. So the National Urban Fellows Organization, was a brainchild of the movements of the 60s. So, a colleague had called it, this was the original Black Lives Matter moment, to where we need to turn, thought into action and action to movement, and produce something to where it's not just talking to the powers that be, but place people into position with the powers that be. And so the idea of the organization is to train younger people, and they were mid-level career people, right, with the tools and give them the tools, the access and the knowledge, to enter into government and other places of power and responsibility, right, to understand the importance of diversity, to understand the importance, of reaching across, many various, perspectives, and understanding different perspectives and implementing that, in a constructive way. And our relationship with the National Fellows Organization, now with the McCourt School in Georgetown, is something that is, really resonates, especially with everything that we've just talked about, right? And, it has been my just pleasure in looking and, in really crafting, young people's minds, in a way to where it's not telling them what to do. It's understanding the language that's being spoken in the policy world, right? And arming them with the tools to understand that language, with, the rest of the McCourt community, knowing that they could take their personal experience, their professional experience, and the tools they've just learned and go into the world and be the change agents that we envisioned in the 60s, in the 70s, to where, full circle now. And it is very encouraging. It is very heartwarming to know that, people are ready, for action and change. And I know I'm very proud that, the school has agreed to be an academic partner. And I hope our relationship lasts far into the future.
And for those of our community who are not familiar with our Master of Policy Management program, could you share a little bit about that program?
Yes, no. So the idea with the Masters of Policy Management program is that we are taking people, who have an interest in public policy, want to be involved in the producing of good policy, but understanding, what is good policy, like I had mentioned just previously, right? But understanding what good policy is, understanding how stakeholders perceive that policy, and then using those tools to implement, good policy. How do you do that? Essentially, it is understanding that there are different policy streams, problem stream, policy stream, and the politics, and the intersection of these streams, and knowing when you can take advantage, of implementing new policy. And so that is the idea, with the Masters of Policy Management program, being a good consumer of information and being in a position to produce better information.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm very grateful to you for taking this time to be with us. As we close, is there a message that you'd like to share with everyone in our community?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I do think that there needs to be, a greater intersection, and a greater collaboration between, academia, between various movements, and our policymakers, in positions of power, whether they be on the Hill or in the executive branch. And as I mentioned earlier, with commonalities and contrasts, there are various opportunities where we have, space in which to work together and learn from each other. And I do hope that this is a model that we can take, with the National Urban Fellows and the rest of the Georgetown community, and we can take moving forward. So I wholeheartedly endorse the Biden administration's message of unity, and hopefully we take that, going into the future.
Thank you very much. I'm so grateful to Dr. Nuku Ofori for joining us today and sharing his expertise and experience with our community. And I'm deeply grateful to you for your work as a member of our community and your contributions, especially to the National Urban Fellows Program, which is such an important dimension of the work that we're engaged in here. So thank you so much for being a part of all this. And I look forward to being with all of you again soon. Take care of yourselves and take care of everyone around you, for every Hoya, everywhere.